We're actually coming into the last few weeks of a series that we've been doing throughout the fall called My Father's Business. Anybody who has raised kids, many of us in here have raised children, and you've taken them from the little baby stage. There's that interesting little season where they go from babies to toddlers. And that's marked oftentimes by this ability to begin to walk. Mm-hmm. They become mobile, and that's when everything changes. You tape down your doorknobs, you move all the knives up to the top drawer.
There's a whole industry selling things just to keep your baby from opening a door.
You don't leave your keys in the car anymore. You know what I mean? There's all kinds, because you realize this little guy, this little girl now is curious and semi-able to do things maybe that aren't the healthiest. And that's a fun time, right? We laugh at that kind of thing. Oh, look, he started the car all by himself. Or whatever, right? But it's a time of exploration and growth, and it's a time where we rejoice. We're not impatient with a 2-year-old learning to walk, even if they trip a few times or stumble around or walk kind of like a sailor that just got off their ship. We think that's cute, right? And that's the process of growth. Mm-hmm. Have you ever, though, in your own Christian life, thought to yourself, man, I should be doing better by now? Mm-hmm. I've been in church for like 10 years. I should probably have a better handle on my anger, or a better handle on my self-pity, or my harshness with people, or whatever, my religiosity. I feel like I'm just, right? And if you felt that, welcome, because I think we all have to some degree.
I would say the human condition is marked by the fact that we grow strong, we grow powerful before we grow wise. Meaning, like, we learn to talk before we learn to say nice things, right? And that's in every area of life. It's amazing. Like, if you see us as a large group, it's amazing what humans can do. The strength of humanity, the abilities of humanity, the things in science that we've pushed past, and the things that we can do, and yet still are so unwise. Mm-hmm. And the process of being formed into the image of Christ is to take those steps together. And that's what you do as a parent, right? You've taken a step, now take a step the right direction. Don't run away from me, run towards me. One of the hardest things you'll ever try to teach a toddler is come here, right? Come here. You're holding a piece of bacon in front of something, like, just come to me. You don't feed
bacon
your kids
moves
bacon.
Me.
Yeah, I come towards bacon.
Yeah. If you read Scripture, especially the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, the way the Master Jesus related and worked with his disciples, in the days that took place and it was written, it was very common for groups of young men to have rabbis, mentors that they followed, spiritual guides, if you will. And every good Jewish young man had a rabbi, and they had a community, a synagogue that they attended. And it was in that place that all kinds of life work was handed off and formed in them. They were formed both in the area of character, they were formed in the area of family and what it meant to be a man, and so on and so forth. But if you watch how Jesus dealt with his disciples, it was very much the same pattern. In fact, what you see is this pattern. And this isn't my idea, it's been talked about for years in different ways, but you find he did like 4 main things. He brought them together, and he worked while they watched. So while he worked, he did miracles and did this and that. They just kind of watched, they just observed. And you kind of think about that in light of your kids, that's what they do. They watch mom stir the chocolate chip cookie batter, and then they just eat the cookies that come out of the oven. But then they go to another level where Jesus worked and he invited them to participate. We're going to read that story this morning. He said, okay, you watched me do it once, but now we're going to do it together. And then there's a third level where he sent them off to try it on their own, but come back and report. Let's debrief. How did it go? This would be, I think, in some ways, kind of like turning your kid loose at high school or university. You don't totally let them go. They kind of come back, hopefully, and you have some dialogue and some debrief. But then there was the 4th level where Jesus left and sent them off to do the work. He didn't leave them alone. He sent the Holy Spirit. But so Jesus did the work, they watched. They did the work together. They did the work on their own while Jesus supervised, and then Jesus sent them off to do the work. It's a pretty cool process, really, of development. But all along the way, they're learning two things, main things. They're learning the character of God and the ways of God. That's what discipleship is about. The character of God and the ways of God. It's not enough to have one without the other. They are inseparable. They're like in this symbiotic relationship. The character of God, the mind of God, and the ways of God.
So we're going to look at Matthew 14, if you want to look there with us. And we're going to see two instances. We're going to go through the first one here in verses 13 through 21. It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the town. So he's going to be alone, but he gets followed by a crowd. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. I love this. I love this. Just to unpack it for a second, just pay attention. This is a full day. Right? It started with him landing and finding a crowd where he was trying to go away to some solitary place. Instead, a crowd follows him. And instead of turning them away at that point, he stops and has compassion on them. He spends an entire day to the evening ministering to them with his disciples watching. And at the evening, they've got this like, hey, Jesus, it's late. Everyone's going to be hungry. Why don't you send them away now?
I like that because they say everybody's hungry, but I have to believe that it's like, Lord, we're really hungry. Mm-hmm. So can we quit now? Mm-hmm. Can we wrap this up and head into town? Anybody who's been in ministry can relate to this, I think. If you've been in ministry or worked with people to any degree, you kind of get to a place in your day, you're like, I've used up all my words and my emotional tank is empty. Can I go home now? And then sure enough, that's when the phone rings or one more person, right? Chantel comes into the office and says, could we just talk for a minute? And I think the disciples were at this human place, right? Of, okay, we're done. Can we wrap it up? And they're all hungry. And then in that moment, Jesus just sort of just flips this thing around and says, well, let's do one more thing. Why don't you give them something to eat? And you can imagine the sense of like looking around. It's going to tell us there's 5,000 men.
And they've already told him why that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
They prefaced this, send them away with, hey, you might say something crazy here, but by the way, there's no place to get food around here. So send them away. And then he turns and asks this almost impossible thing. Impossible in that they don't have anything left, and impossible that they don't have anything physical left either.
And so the writer would say, well, find out what's out there. And it's interesting, the question that Jesus says, well, what do you have? What do you have? He didn't say, what do you think I can do? Mm-hmm. He asked them the question, the human beings, the disciples of the rabbi, well, what do you have? I really believe, you guys, that's such a key question for us, because I think sometimes we look at what we have and we just don't see much. They said, well, here's the thing in verse 17. They said, well, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus said, well, bring them to me. Bring them to me. I pray, I don't know why this morning I'm stuck on that question, what do you have? You know, what is it that you have in your hand, in your life, in your experience, in your toolbox, in your ability? It doesn't say, well, wait till you have it all. He says, what do you have? And I really think there's something there for us to carry away this morning, that the God of the universe is in this moment. They don't realize it totally. I don't think at this right here, I'm not sure it's dawned on them that he's asking us to partner with him. That Jesus is saying, listen, I'm the senior partner. I'm the one who's going to take the fall for the company. I'm the one whose reputation is on the line. But in spite of it all, I want to know what you have.
You know what else I see here is these are guys who have already given up their life for him. They've walked away from everything. And they're down to taking another kid's lunch. What do you have? Well, I've got this thing.
Cough it up, kid.
I got from that kid over there. That's all I have. Are you really going to ask that from me? And I've been there in my life where I really felt like, God, I've given you everything. I went away to missions. We sold the house. We got rid of our dog, Jesus, okay, for you. And I'll never forget, because I had one thing that really felt like my possession that I did not want to lose. This is going to sound funny, but it was a pillow. You know how there's a pillow that fits you and you don't want to? I wrote my name on big letters on the pillow because this is a whole, just hang with me for a minute. Because I didn't want to lose it and everything else was gone. And I'll just never forget, I went on an outreach one time and I didn't take it and I came back and it was gone. I'm like, really, Jesus? The pillow? You had to have the pillow too? And I just felt like at that moment, like God's like, yeah, there's no end to lordship. There's no end to lordship. There's no like, you can have all of this, but not this. It just doesn't happen in the believer's life. If he's Lord of anything, he's Lord of everything.
And he directs the people to sit down on the grass. And then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. And then, don't miss this line, he gave those loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. It's a crazy principle right there of just this simple imitation. Okay, give me what you have. Now, right before your eyes, and I don't know what the positioning was, the actual physical positioning of this encounter, but somehow in my mind, I picture kind of like a huddle, right? These 12 guys, you can picture a football huddle, and these 12 guys are like, Jesus, there's 5,000 people out there, and a whole bunch of kids, and we don't have enough to feed them. And Jesus says, huddle up. What do you have? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Give them to me. He blesses them, and he begins to break them, and right before their eyes, they begin to multiply, because 5 loaves and 2 fishes wouldn't even feed 12 guys for the most part. Well, who gets the fish, right? But so all of a sudden it starts multiplying right before their eyes. And then he says, okay, now give them to the people. So at that moment, they had to have there had to have been this moment, this pregnant with tension, where they realize, okay, that was easy because Jesus did it for us, but now we're going to have to turn around and face a crowd. I mean, 5,000 people, if there's 500 people in this room, we're talking 10 times the amount of people, and women and children, maybe 20 times. And they have to turn around and go, I hope this works for me. I hope you do this again, Lord. And listen, in that moment, there is this tension of faith. There's this, I don't know how else to describe it, but just this leap of faith, this moment where you say, I'm going to trust that you've spoken to us. I'm going to trust, Lord, that you've called me to do this. You've called me to say this. You've called me to imitate you. I saw you do it, and now I'm just going to imitate you.
That's what it looks like to grow in faith. People ask, well, how do I grow? How do you get more faith? Because I think there's this idea of faith, it's a lot to unpack, but people think, well, if I only had enough faith, this would happen or that would happen. This is what faith growth looks like. You see it maybe in something a little bit smaller, and you're willing to just turn around and try it a little bit bigger. And then from that, you just, okay, if he can do that, maybe he can do this. And you go one step farther and one step farther. That's what our growth looks like. Because what happened when they turned is they all ate and were satisfied. And disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men besides women and children.
Can you imagine this word tension again? Mm-hmm. It was this moment of tension that caused their faith muscle to grow. Mm-hmm. Listen, all you bodybuilders out there, wouldn't it be great just to take all the supplements that someone just gave you the pill and thou shalt be buffed, right? That's all you need to do. Just take this 3 times a day and you're going to look like Pastor Jason.
I'm taking the wrong pill.
This lady that visited last week, she said, hey, I really like the way you guys do that millennial guy and you guys do really well up there. It's like, don't tell him that. It's just going to go to his head.
For weeks. I'm never going to forget that. I was called a millennial. I'm moving back home.
She's shaking her head. He's like, I know, isn't that lame? And so it's like, But without tension, everybody knows that you have to go to the gym. You have to do something. Maybe it's not the gym, but you have to press against something. You have to, if you're going to build physical muscle, it has to be up against tension. It has to be, you have to push something that's difficult. And when you're done pushing that, your muscles literally are bigger than they were when you started. If you keep at it, you actually do end up with a lifestyle. And faith is the exact same thing. Jesus is really concerned about our faith. He says James said the trial of our faith is more precious than gold. That's going to be next week. But it's this idea that faith isn't a static thing. It's either growing or atrophying. It's going one direction or the other. And so after they turned around and they picked up these 12 basketfuls of broken pieces and they realized the number that was fed, the gospel writer's careful to tell us the details, was 5,000 plus women and children. Can you imagine that debrief time? Can you imagine just the short, hey, let's huddle up, and what just happened there?
Did you see how many I gave out? I think I gave out more.
They're bragging about it.
Yeah.
Oh, 6 baskets. It's like there must have been this elation, this like, can you believe what we just were a part of? I mean, really, wouldn't that be a cool thing? Many of you in this room have made a decision over the last few years to go with us on an outreach, a missionary outreach, a missions trip. And so you've plunked down $1,000 or whatever, and you've taken a week off of work going, well, I don't know. And at the beginning, oftentimes there's a little bit of skepticism and like, I hope this. But it's crazy after we debrief every time. In fact, when we do missions trips, we tend to debrief every night because we're asking the question, what did you hear God say today? Well, we're building houses down there in Mexico. What did you see today? What did you hear today? What was going on inside you? What did you feel today? And what you hear described as people's faith growing.
That leads to a great question. What was the point of this miracle?
Yeah.
Why did he do this? I think he legitimately cared about 5,000 people's needs, or 10,000, however many people were actually there with the kids. But I think he cared about their needs. But think about it. He didn't just accomplish that one thing, making sure that they were fed, because they're going to be hungry again in the morning. They could have skipped that meal and they'd all been fine. But he fed all of them, and he did this other thing with the disciples. He didn't just make a bunch of followers that day. He already had them as followers. They might have been leaning in after that and like, oh, where's he going to go next? It's going to be exciting. But he made disciples go that much deeper. Now, these men have seen something that they're never going to walk away from.
If this is just, in my opinion, this is like a description of church community. Jesus went from giving people fish to making fishermen. So in one day he fed 5,000 and an X number of women and children. And you know what? Like Jason said, the next day they're hungry. I mean, as pastors, we could spend our entire lives and more just giving people fish and bread. I think some churches have fallen into this trap of let's just meet all the needs of all the people all the time. And then you die. And the pastors die first because it's impossible. But what Jesus did is he said, look, I'm not only going to feed fish and bread to people, but I'm going to form fishermen. So on multiple levels, Jesus is working. He's feeding the 5,000, he's giving them bread and fish, pure grace, and then he's also training these fishermen who will go on to train others. That's what we're after here as pastors. We love to feed you, but what we hope you do is that you learn to feed others.
Can I just say, too, that one of the things that was transformed here wasn't just fish and bread. The men were transformed, but specifically their feelings were transformed. They went into this feeling done, right? They went into this feeling like, we can't do anymore. I mean, we started this day needing a break. We started this day looking for somewhere solitary to take a break, and now we ended up working all day. We're done. But they ended the day, I mean, they had to be like, now what are we going to do? What else can you do? I've never seen anything like this. Their feelings were transformed. And if we only ask our feelings what to do and whether to obey Jesus, we're going to be in deep trouble. We're going to be stuck in this, how do I grow my faith question, and we're never going to get out of it. Because often our feelings are going to tell you, do what's comfortable. That's what my feelings say. That's why I look so buff. Thanks for pointing it out. Right? What do I feel? How much exercise do I feel like doing today? How much do I feel like giving away today? How much do I feel like serving people today? I can't always be asking myself that question. There's another question to be asked, and that is about the worthiness of God. What's he worth today? What's he worth? See, the difference between the two, one asks, what's it going to cost me? And it's okay, count the cost. But if you're only focused on the cost, you're missing out on what it's worth. And it's worth so much more than you know going into it. You don't see the worth until you're through the other side.
So in this passage, there's two faith lessons. That's number one. Number two is this. And immediately after this encounter, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him on the other side. And he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. So these disciples now are on their home turf. They are used to being on that boat, on that lake. This is where they lived their lives. They were fishermen. And so in their, what should have been their strong suit, what should have been their natural place of proficiency, they're alone and they're tired because circumstances are against them. I think that's significant. I think because what God is doing, so they are using their rowing muscles like crazy, but God is after a different kind of development of a different kind of muscle. I think sometimes we want to stick with where our comfortable muscles are. I'm really good at this particular thing. Don't pull me out of my comfort zone. Now, I think you should function in your gifting and so on and so forth. But I think God has this way of pulling us out of where we're comfortable. Because God is much more interested in our development, like Jason said, than our comfort. Just like you are with your children. You make your kids do certain things, and even though they say, you don't love me, when actually you're doing them exactly because you love them. If you loved me, you wouldn't make me go to school. You wouldn't make me get up in the morning. You wouldn't make me eat broccoli. Of course you would. Because you know something from your perspective. You're doing what they think, what they interpret as pain, and you say, no, this is like because I love you so much, honey.
So here they are in a very uncomfortable place like he was just describing, but it's about to get even worse. They're in this place of no progress, hard work, and it's got to be a little bit like, okay, how bad is this going to get? People die on this lake. We know that. And it's about to get even scarier because shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake like you do. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and they're screaming, "It's a ghost," they said in fear. I love how they're just like, the gospel writers who are, these guys are just like very clear about it. Yeah, we were afraid. Yeah, they're honest about their humanity here. They were terrified.
Can you imagine these grown men? I mean, it's just kind of a, well, they terrified, it's a ghost, and they cried out in fear. But it had to have been an emotional moment. So they've just come off of a miracle of feeding thousands, and now they're alone in the lake, and they think, we're all going to die, we're terrified. And I think the cool thing here is that I think, myself included, we look at men of God or women of God, and we think, oh, they must have just been slightly superhuman. Those guys, every man of God is walked on water. In the Vatican, if anybody ever been to the Vatican in Rome? As you go into the plaza, I think we have a picture here, there is St. Peter's Basilica. They built this building during the Renaissance era. And it was the most modern and the most impressive piece of architecture of its day. If you go inside that dome, it's designed that when you stand inside there, it is deliberately designed to make you feel small. It's designed to make you feel overwhelmed. They did that on purpose so that anybody visiting from whatever country, from whatever demographic, whatever religion, would feel dwarfed by the God of St. Peter. And along the top, if you go back to the picture, are these guys on the ceiling. The guys up there are the disciples. Those are the guys who sort of keep guard over the basilica. And they're bigger than life. But you know what? They cried out in terror and said, "It's a ghost." And my point is whether you're St. Peter or Billy Graham or somebody else that you look up to, listen, the God of the universe wants to work with you. He's not looking for the perfect credentials. I'm looking for a Billy Graham. Billy Graham was just a yielded guy, just like you and I, who kind of got saved selling shoes, along with D.L. Moody and a whole bunch of other giants of the faith. But sometimes I think, well, that's Peter, and but listen, this is God in us, right? And he said, listen. And so it's cool. I think Peter, in this moment, Jesus says to them, look, take courage. It's I. Don't be afraid. What are you afraid of? And Peter, I think, has this moment where he's like, oh, I've been here before. Not here in the boat, but remember the tension thing? I think Peter had this moment. I felt this before. This thing of uncertainty, this thing of trust me, this thing of take a chance, this thing of do what I tell you and it's going to come out well. I think I've been here before. And so Peter blurts out, well, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. He's not presumptuous. He doesn't say, hey, I'm getting out, I'm walking on the water, just like Jesus. He says, I'm gonna ask, Lord, can I imitate you right here? The last time I imitated you turned out awesome. Can I do this again now because this thing has captured my attention?
Come, he says to Peter, get out of the boat, walked on the water, came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid again and began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he says. Why did you doubt? When they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, yeah, you're definitely the Son of God. I love that. He had a revelation. I didn't need a sermon, anything else. Like, okay, you multiply fish and bread, you walk on water, we're believers.
Where would God call you? I'm not saying, hey, you're going to go from 0 to Africa in one jump. Maybe you are, if you're in YWAM, I don't know. But honestly, no. As we finish up here, worship team can come up, we'll finish. But where is the place? If you wake up one day and realize you're not healthy, and your doctor says your cholesterol's high, you're X amount overweight, and you need to get in shape. Well, the first step is you start, let's see, You look in your fridge and I don't know, maybe there's things you throw out and then you go buy a gym membership. Maybe that's the next step. And going into that door, that gym, and talking to everybody that seems to be in shape except you, and you're sure everybody's looking at you and judging you. You have to get past that first line of tension and say, okay, I'm here to sign up. My wife sent me, or my doctor sent me, or whatever. My point is that everybody has the next step. God is not just looking for professionals. He's just looking for people who want to exercise their faith and who want to grow and see their lives shaped because of it.
You have to encounter Jesus to do this. Just to be clear, this isn't a self-help. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to start doing miracles. That doesn't work. I'm going to start doing hard stuff. You gotta see Jesus. You got to hear from Jesus. And we know where to find him, right? You find him in the Word. You find him in prayer. You find him sometimes in the middle of the day when you're not expecting him at all, and he says, hey, why don't you try this? But I just want to encourage us that the very, very first step, even before obedience, is to encounter Jesus, to listen for those Jesus moments. And pay attention to the times when it feels like impossible. When the thing he's asking for feels like more than you could do, it's the end of the day, I can't do that, or I don't have the resources that you're asking for, or it's literally miraculous. Really pay attention to those moments. And don't dismiss them so quickly, because often that is where he loves to speak the most.
I can't get this out of my head that around this room there's 1,000 opportunities, and they're not all the same. For some of you, it's, hey, he's called you to write a book, and you don't know where to start. So by faith, take a writing class. Some of you, he's called to talk to your neighbor that you haven't talked to in a year. And by faith, it's going to start with a handshake or an invitation to have a coffee. Some of you are stuck maybe in a rut of conflict that you can't seem to get out. And so maybe taking a step towards a mediator or a counselor and unpacking your life and telling the truth to somebody for the first time may be that following of Jesus. Some of us, maybe it's just forgiveness. I've had this block in my life and I can't seem to get around it. When this person's name comes to my mind, my heart starts racing and my pulse, and maybe it's time to forgive. Some of you maybe are called into a ministry but you're just afraid of intimacy, or you're afraid of trust, and so maybe joining a life group is the step. There's 1,000 opportunities in this room. And please don't think it's just for the professionals. Those guys up on the basilica. It's us, see? It's us. Eugene Peterson has this great line. He says, "All the persons of faith I know are sinners, doubters, and uneven performers. We are secure not because we are sure of ourselves, but because we trust that God is sure of us." That's the God that we're describing this morning.
The walk of faith first looks like I said, coming to Jesus, and that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to have an opportunity for communion, right? We commune with God, we commune with one another in fellowship over this meal that He instituted. But then at some point, we've got to turn. We come to the table, and He multiplies life in us. But then He challenges us, are you going to turn around to the crowd and multiply what I've done in you? So during the length of this song, I want to encourage you to come. There's stations around the room to get communion, and then when we all have it in our hands, at the end of the song, we'll all take together.